Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Kegler, and I'm a librarian at SUNY Brockport, actually joining you from Spencerport today, where I live. This session is called Building a Culture of Empathy During a Pandemic. It will be presented by Caterina Reed and Dana Reijerkerk. Caterina is the Instructional Support Associate for Content, Acquisitions, and Services at Stony Brook University Libraries. She holds an MS in Information and Library Science and an MA in English. Her interests include database management, accessibility, equity and inclusion, and building a culture of trust. Dana Reijerkerk is from Stony Brook University. She is the Knowledge Management and Digital Assets Librarian. Her interests include user experience design, Indigenous information privacy, and digital asset management. For today, this will be recorded, so please understand that. And please mute yourself unless you're invited to speak or that they open it up for discussion. I will be monitoring the chat. If you have questions, please put them there or feel free to message me individually. And I will give you all a 5-minute warning if you get close to the time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caterina and Dana, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation, this Building a Culture of Empathy During a Pandemic. I just want to go over a couple of things before we start. First, we will have time for you to share your own experiences of building a culture of empathy in your workspaces at the end. And then also we'd like to answer all questions at the end. I'd like to also mention that it's not really a trigger warning, it's more of mental health and wellness. If you experience any feelings during this presentation, things that you'd like to, bottle up, feel free to step away from the presentation at any point. Empathy is really about digging deep into yourself and maybe releasing feelings that you've wanted to cover up for a while. So please understand that, and we understand that. So please take time for yourself. Also, I just want to point out the quote on this slide. It says, "Empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself," by Mohsin Ahmed. This is really going to be echoed throughout the presentation, and we will tie this up at the end. So please just keep that quote in mind when we're going through the slides. Well, thank you again, and we'll get started. Okay, I don't know why this slide, there we go. I didn't know why the arrow wasn't working. Okay, so again, my name is Caterina Reed, and I'm the Instructional Support Associate at Stony Brook University. And I do acquisitions work, so ordering, invoicing, receiving, serials, that type of thing. We wanted to get a little personal with our photos today. So this is me in my soccer uniform before I mastered a poker face. And so even though I was the smallest on the soccer team, I was actually the best goalie. So I don't know if that fearlessness of getting hit with a soccer ball has brought me here today. I don't know, but I'll pass things on to Dana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana. I'm the Knowledge Management Digital Assets Librarian, which is a mouthful. Essentially, that means that I have to know what systems we have and where our digital stuff is, and then what our systems talk to each other about and why or why not. If I had to boil it down, I would say that's probably what I do. So this is a photo of me. I was probably like 8 or 9. I was really into cheerleading. I don't know why. I'm not really like a girly girl, but for some reason I have probably like hundreds of photos of me dressed in this like vaudeville face and pose. And I felt it really just captures like my inner whimsical spirit that I hope to share with you in this presentation.
So before we move on, I just want to, we'll probably discuss it a little bit later, but I just wanted to say that I had started working at Stony Brook June 2020, the middle of the pandemic. And I knew of Dana's name, just like I kind of know everybody's name in the directory, but I didn't know her personally. So I'm on this committee, and they had promoted Dana's presentation that was held in November 2020. And I was really interested because it was on Indigenous research, and I was like, wow, this is really very interesting and I have to attend. So I didn't ask any questions during the presentation, but immediately after I emailed her, and she had, she was the one who was assertive enough to say like, hey, let's have a Zoom and discuss more at length. So from then on, we've been inseparable. So
yes, yes, it's a condition at this point. So if you haven't clued in yet, and we've really said this is really informal. It's more like in the spirit of empathy, and an example or like a practical exercise of what Kat and I have done throughout the pandemic to be empathetic with each other. We want this presentation to just be a space to be mindful and self-reflective and evaluative, and again, share parts of ourselves with each other and you. So what I would love to share and what I really enjoy about this presentation is we have Skeletor memes incorporated throughout this presentation. Kat and I love 80s and oldies things, and He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was this fabulous 80s show of just garbage, and it was great. And so Skeletor was the main villain who you see on the screen. He had the same drawn character body as He-Man. The only difference was his skull face and this like hood, but he's shirtless, but he's wearing like this little hood, and it's adorable. So Skeletor affirmations are a type of meme where you have a screenshot of a still from the show of Skeletor with positive content or empathetic phrases superimposed on top. So this is one that I love. So today I take time for myself when I'm stressed. One really important, often forgotten thing of empathy is to be empathetic with yourself, to be mindful and draw boundaries around what you have the mental, emotional capacity to do at any given time. And this is particularly important during a pandemic. And so in this presentation, we're going to talk about professional standards for librarianship. We're going to go over in tech services at Stony Brook University Libraries, which both Kat and I are in, what kind of work culture we have, and then how COVID and remote work has impacted that. We're going to define empathy, explain why we feel it's important, and then we're going to share personal examples of empathy just throughout the presentation. And then at the very end, we will have open discussion where you can share your own examples of empathy in the workplace. Okay, I just got to toggle my face. Okay, so here, there's a whole bunch of professional standards for librarianship. These are just two examples, ALA and SAA. Some standards use the word empathy explicitly, like SAAs, but others don't. But the adjectives and values expressed within all of these standards do belie to what empathy is, which is reciprocity. It's about sharing, giving back. It could be equal measure. It could be, I have a bunch of energy today, so I'm gonna like spam it at Kat, and she's gonna be like, wow, this is amazing. Or maybe I don't have the mental capacity to deal with something, and then I draw a boundary and say, I don't have the mental capacity to deal with this today. All of that, I think, is somehow encapsulated in what empathy is. So the ALA Code of Ethics, it says, we treat coworkers and other colleagues with respect, fairness, and good faith, and advocate conditions of employment that safeguard the rights and welfare of all employees of our institutions. I really like this one because it talks about respect, but also good faith. A good way in which we can express empathy is to enter conversations, particularly ones that are really uncomfortable, with an open mind, not going into a conversation with expectations of this person will say X. And I think that this statement really talks to that, and I love that. Then the SAA Code of Ethics, archivists strive to cooperate and collaborate with these other people in their professional relationships with donors, record creators, users, communities. Archivists should be as respectful, honest, transparent, empathetic, and equitable as possible. I really like the as possible aspect of this because it talks more about how empathy is not an achievement. It's not a goal, it's not a state. It's something that you're always wanting to work towards. And it's like a daily goal you have for yourself. But once you achieve it, it's not like one and done. It's more like a reoccurring assignment you have to give yourself. Next slide. Okay. So when we were preparing this presentation, we were trying to think of how to describe our work culture. And we had a couple laughs, but I feel like this Lord of the Rings meme here on the left encapsulates our feeling. One does not simply change corporate culture. At Stony Brook University, especially in tech services, I think a lot of our problems relating to how we do not have an empathetic work culture somehow stem to the fact that we're set up like corporate culture, even though we're a library. And so just a couple examples. One, at Stony Brook, like I assume many other tech services experience, we have really high turnover. And so this legacy of high turnover within tech services has created this demographic where a lot of our colleagues are have been here forever. They've been here like 20, 30 years. In my department, for example, of all three of my colleagues and coworkers, they've been here at least 20 years. I think Steve has been there, he's probably been there longer. But then there's me, who's only been here like a year and a couple months. And that creates this kind of uneven balance where it's really difficult to express empathy with each other because we have such different life experiences. Then the second component of that is the actual architecture of the building. It's more built like we're a corporate office suite. So in tech services, everybody has office cubicles. Some have doors and like high walls, but it doesn't reach the ceiling, where others have kind of like a half partition kind of, and all the computers are facing the wall. And so in order to talk to each other, look at each other even, we'd have to physically turn our entire body around. And it makes it even more difficult to communicate even hello, hi, how are you with each other. And then the other additional tech component of the architecture, whomever designed our building for the main library, I don't know what was going on there. There's like an inner building and then an outer one that like ate the inner building. There's a long hallway all along the outer wall of the library, and that's how you get to us. You have to go along this, like you walk around the whole building. And tech services, in addition to that crazy, is physically separate from all the other librarians in the main library. And so for us to communicate with those not in our unit, it's incredibly difficult, and they would have to really, all of us would have to go out of our way physically to talk and meet with each other. And COVID and remote work really exacerbated that physical distance. And the physical distance at this point has really equated emotional distance. So before, it was very difficult just to get to know somebody in our units and departments, but now it feels almost impossible. And I think that's why it's so important for Kat and I to emphasize, like, it was so serendipitous that we met. We never would have talked to each other if she didn't happen to see this presentation I did, and then have the courage to reach out and be like, hi, I'm your coworker. You don't know me, but we've apparently worked together for 6 months. We still laugh about that.
So true.
So true. And so I think the Skeletor meme on the right speaks to that, where it's like progress, not perfection, where we have all of these barriers and challenges related to corporate work culture embedded in how we interact with each other. And so it's important, therefore, to slowly make these changes to the culture that's been here since the building was created, in just ways in which are actually manageable for individuals. Next slide.
Okay, so this is a 2-minute short video, but before I play it, I just want to say, as library professionals, we like to think we know what empathy is. It's in our job descriptions. It's required of us in, information literacy and reference and interactions. And I think we often forget to practice empathy with each other, with our colleagues. So without further ado, I'm going to play the video. This video is the voice is by Dr. Brene Brown. For those of you who are not aware of Dr. Brene Brown's work, she's an expert in the fields of shame, vulnerability, and empathy. She has books called Dare to Lead and The Gifts of Imperfection. Those are two separate books. So I'll play the video, and I'll just have a couple of points after. Can you hear?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can.
Okay, perfect.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So this video gets me every time, but the major highlights of this video is basically don't try to at least or silver lining it. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. And so we're going to go more in depth with that in the future slides. So I hope you enjoyed that video as much as we do.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So there's a comic on this slide, and I'm going to describe it. But before I do, I just want to say that, you know, Dana and I we started off as very functional. We would have like a Zoom lunch meeting, and then after talking and eating, we would just start working like in silence. There would be no, hey, we're going to start working now. We would just finish eating and then start working together. And it just felt so seamless, and it felt like we were working on site, because we would just hear clicking and typing, and then, you know, once in a while I'll get a, hey, how do you spell, and what's that? And so, you know, once in a while you'd be like, oh, there's someone there. But it was just great. But going back to the comic, so the comic says, there's two folks on the comic, and one says, what's with that jar? And the other says, this is my hate jar. Whenever I get real mad, I want to yell at someone, I just put those mean words in my hate jar where they can't hurt anybody. And then the other one says, what happens if no? And they get their face blown off by the hate jar. So what this comic illustrates is really how bad it is to bottle up your feelings. And this can really affect your day-to-day and your work performance. So having someone there to listen to you, to hear you, rather than bottling up your feelings, is actually better. And that's empathy in practice.
Mhm.
Okay. So just some personal experiences. This meme, Skeletor Affirmation says, today I reach out to others. For me personally, as I'm sure many of you during the pandemic, and especially for those of us who are introverts, I've just become more reticent over time and just like, just working in this silo by myself. But having the lunches over Zoom with Dana, like doing like Google chat messages once in a while, like that has made all the difference. Even for the folks I work with on site, we're physically distant, and at least 10 feet apart. So, asking how they're doing, seeing if they did well during a storm, working together, just smiling, doing things like that can really make a difference. And it's really, I think, important to be authentic rather than, trying to be performative. When you're authentic, it makes really all the difference. And I think what we're trying to get at is also being collegial doesn't always mean being serious. Like that's why we're doing this informal presentation. We're sharing parts of ourselves with you. Sometimes you need to have that authenticity to make the relationships work. So, yeah, I'll turn things over to Dana and then I'll.
Okay. So here are just some other examples of ways in which you can express empathy at work. You can talk about it. You could talk about your personal problems. And personal problems, like personal life and work distinction, I don't think that it's such a clear distinction, particularly during the pandemic. So for example, I've had 6 people die from COVID in my family. And meanwhile, at work, I've been working on this COVID documentation archive project where we're collecting personal narrative stories, people's own experiences about COVID for this documentation project. And as my librarian role, I have to actually read it and look at it and manage the files. And that was incredibly difficult. And so having space to talk about that, I would like go to Kat or go to my colleagues who I worked very closely with on that project and say, like, I just don't have the capacity today. I'm struggling. I need to take off. I can't look at this today. Or we would talk about, what could I do to help you? That was so helpful to me. And we're always going to have something in our personal lives that impacts us, regardless of the pandemic. And being able to have a conversation, but then knowing what to say, like a dialogue, a template, saying, I don't have the capacity to do this, or I don't have the mental energy to do this right now, or I'm emotionally drained right now. Knowing these key phrases and then feeling comfortable and confident to say them to somebody else, whether it's via Zoom, text, Google Chat message, I think is a really good toolkit to have for you. And then the Skeletor affirmation. Today I spend less time talking and more time listening. Skeletor, it's kind of a joke, but at the same time, within the show, like canonically, Skeletor was like the main evil villain, and then there were probably like a handful of weird villains, like an octopus guy. It was great. But the point was, despite the fact that over like the 300 episodes that He-Man ran, they never killed He-Man or defeated him, and that was the whole point of their evil villain plan. But Skeletor did a really good job of actually like affirming like Evelyn, and I love that name because her name was Evelyn. Evelyn would always fail, but Skeletor would go to her and they still remained close. They would have conversations in the show about like defeating He-Man. And in a way, I think Skeletor was a really good role model for empathy. And what I find really ironic and whimsical about these Skeletor affirmations is that I could totally see him mechanically saying this stuff. He would say it with his evil laugh, and it would be great. But I could totally see him saying that. And I think that's another good toolkit thing to have for you, being able to go into a conversation without predetermined judgment of this is how the conversation is going to end. This is what they're going to say. And being able to like actively listen. So ask questions like, why do you feel that way? Or regurgitate back what somebody said. Like I would do that with Kat all the time. Or especially like if you're texting somebody, you might not understand what they said, like they had a typo or something. And then if somebody shares a personal struggle, just confirm what they're saying. And same with the video. The point of uncomfortable conversations isn't to have a point. That's the point. It's to just exist with them in that space and in that moment, to be present, to show that you're there. And that is no response, but that is you responding to their need. You're not saying like, oh, that sucks, or I can do this, or here's how we could mitigate it. Sometimes there just needs to be a moment where you're mindful this person is struggling or this is happening, and you just kind of sit there with them.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to start backwards. So the last bullet, it says SHRM resources. So that is actually stands for SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resource Management. It's basically a professional association for HR professionals. So just like ALA is for librarians, and they have a whole toolkit for, it's for HR professionals, but I think we can learn something from them. They actually have these quick tips for HR, and I think that they're relevant here. And so one is, in order to strengthen connections, 1, encourage storytelling in your organization. 2, empower everyone to give recognition and appreciation. 3, find a way to visualize connections among colleagues. 4, amplify and celebrate your own culture. And 5, encourage mentoring. So this ties in with the 4th bullet, which is cultivate compassion. And at the heart of this is empathy. The 3rd bullet, encourage genuine perspective taking. What is that? That is, genuine perspective taking is basically recognizing someone else's lived experience as their truth and being authentically available for the other person. So just tying into what Dana was saying, you don't necessarily have to have the answer. The point is not to have an answer. The point is to sit there and hear someone, and recognizing someone's pain or distress. And it's not stepping into someone else's shoes. So you're not like trying to say, I need to understand their situation, or that sucks to be them. You know, what you're trying to do is, okay, when was a time when I was in pain and distress? Okay, yeah, that really sucked. That is what this other person is feeling right now. They're feeling pain and distress. So I will sit with them and make them feel like they're being, that's what I would have liked when I was going through my own pain and distress. So that is really what empathy is. The point is not to have an answer or try to make, you know, exactly what the video was saying, like using this toxic positivity of, oh, everything's going to be okay. Because sometimes it's not going to be okay. Okay. And so why do we need empathy? I just love this skeleton affirmation. Your thoughts matter, your dreams matter, your life matters, you matter. And that ties in really well with the first bullet on this slide, which is increases positive relationship building and rapport. So when you go into work and someone acknowledges you and values you, that is so important, because, you know, there's nothing like going into work and just seeing a smile on someone's face, or having someone say like, how do you feel today? And actually mean it, and not just as a, you know, as a passerby. That is really great. And it really cultivates a really good work environment. The second point is allowing colleagues to express themselves in a non-judgmental way. When people express themselves, and I'm sure all of you know this, there's always that fear of like retaliation or judgment, that someone is going to say like, you know, or shame, that what you say is going to change someone else's thoughts of you. But giving a space for someone to express themselves and not have judgment is really important, especially for that person's mental wellness. It can decrease their negative feeling just by having someone listen to them. Non-judgmental listening can decrease distress and can help with morale. And I really believe that empathy is like the catalyst for positive change in the workplace. And next slide. Okay, so here's a slide for suggestions for supervisors and colleagues. I would recommend starting small, because if you're doing this type of work, as you can see, it takes a lot out of you. So you're not going to be doing this for 100 people. Each person needs to do their part. So, you know, start small with frequent check-in emails or coffee, Zoom conversations. If you haven't started this work at all, I would start even smaller, and just start with saying hello. You know, start saying hello and do it with a smile, and kind of give off or exude to the other person that you're going to be there for them to listen, for them to listen, or speak to you. So that's really important. And if you want to build up on that, you can do scaffolded training sessions for all staff and faculty on active listening and being present. And this can increase morale, which is great, because you're a supervisor. Morale is great because, you know, you might get more productivity. You know, your employees will more likely be invested in the work and the project, stay longer hours, and collaborate more. So this is all just good stuff all around. Okay, these are very actionable items, folks. Okay. Before we get to the conclusion of our presentation, I just want to emphasize New York Project Hope. It's a free and confidential service. If you're not aware of it already, I'm sure many of you are. We tend to promote these type of services for our users and patrons, but New York Project Hope is free and confidential. So if you are experiencing any distress yourself, especially COVID related, feel free to call. And, you know, I hope that you have someone that you can listen to, have someone listen to you and your concerns. So thank you again for listening. And I just want to close and go back to Mohsin Ahmed's quote about seeing the parts of yourself in others. And that's really what empathy is. And it doesn't mean that we're trying to fix the problem. It's really about listening and allowing for space for the other person to speak and feel heard. And just like as you would want someone to listen to you when you're going through your own hardships, then you would want to be that person for someone else. And as Dana said, it's all about reciprocity. So thank you so much for listening to us. And now we'll move to questions and also your personal examples. So feel free to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dana and Caterina. I've been following the chat and I don't see any questions there yet, but hopefully people will pipe in and unmute themselves and talk.
I see that Erin had mentioned this book called The Rabbit Listened by Corey, I hope I don't screw this up, Doerfeld. It's a kid's book, but it shares a great lesson on how to be empathetic. I have not read that, so I will definitely put that on my list. So thank you for the suggestion.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sharon. I work in SUNY downstate. It seems that empathy is more personal than sympathy. So how can we be more comfortable with doing that with our coworkers?
That is a great question, Cheryl. So I'm actually a very reserved person, and everybody is different. That's the point of empathy. Everybody is different, and everybody has their own lived experiences, and we don't, even though we're all human, we have different experiences in life. And so I'm a very reserved person. I don't really share a lot about myself right away, and so I tend to be more of a listener. So when I approach new people, in order to express empathy, I really give the other party a lot of space to voice their concerns and really try to be that person, like, okay, I'll sit with you, I'll be silent. And that's really the key to empathy and growing relationships. Sometimes you just need to be the listener. But it's also, you know, someone who's sharing, they're really brave and being courageous with sharing a personal experience with you. Because yes, this is a workplace. You know, it feels kind of weird sharing like, oh, I'm going through this marital issue or this mental health issue. But sometimes we spend most of our time at work. So especially during COVID, our work and home life has melded together. So it's so important that there's at least one person at work that you feel comfortable talking to, and it can feel really isolating when you don't have that person. So I know that feeling, and that's why I want to be that person for other people, to just let them share things with me. And if you're willing to listen, you also have to be willing to be keeping that information confidential. You don't want to be sharing that information with everybody else. Just because that person shared with you doesn't mean you have the right to share that information with other people. So if someone expressed to you a mental health concern, like, you're not going to go out and tell everybody. So this is really, I think, difficult work. And so there's no right answer, but there are definitely things you should not do. And it really is about trust, building trust with that other person and saying, like, I'm here for you whenever you need me, and, you know, we'll have that space. I don't know if Dana wants to answer that question too.
I guess I'm more extroverted than Kat. So
Yes, you are.
Okay, a little. Yes. Normally especially for my position at Stony Brook, I'll use a Southern phrase. They're very useful, I find. You have to be willing to, like, stick your foot in the badger's nest. That means that you have to be willing to, like, put your foot in your mouth. Like, a badger is very angry. And so if your foot is in their nest, they will do everything to destroy your foot. So it's like being willing to take that first plunge, start that uncomfortable conversation. It's better to show up than to not show up. And like for me, this past year, in the back of my mind, I've had to deal with like these 6 deaths while then also maintain like professionalism and like get out of bed and like do some with my hair. Like even small things like that were honestly a struggle with all that death. It was a huge struggle. But what helped me was knowing, like, a mindset internally. This other person hates having to communicate like this too. They are also uncomfortable. They're also dealing with this. It's like when you have to call someone to schedule an appointment, the person on the phone with you does not want to be on the phone either. That's really helped me, having that mindset, like knowing, they're just as scared as me. They're just as tired or grumpy or hungry or whatever. It helps then know that whatever they say to you about whatever, it's not about you. It's whatever they're personally dealing with that has them acting a certain way. There's so many questions now.
I'm going to go through all the questions, but I see that Caitlin's question kind of ties into this one. Do you have any suggestions for ways to connect with colleagues who may be resistant to opening up about things going on in their lives? Yeah, and so that's a real tough one because I'd probably put myself in that group, but you really have to start small. And when I say start small, like this can take months. Like you would have to start really, really small with smiling. If you've never like really talked to that person before, start talking to them, you know, like, hey, how's your day going? Or like, you know, maybe making more conversation related to your work project. Oh my goodness, that traffic. And I hate small talk, but sometimes it can be a good stepping stone into more conversation. And when you start seeing that person look at you and listen and reflect back, you're like, oh, okay, I can give a little bit more to this person. I can trust them with a little bit more information. But yeah, as I said before, like I'm a very, very private person. So the amount of things that Dana knows.
Yeah, I feel like that's how we became friends.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and as I said, you're not going to be this person for everybody. So you can be an empathetic person and you can, you know, be collegial with everybody in your workspace, but it doesn't mean you're going to be that listener for every single person in your organization because it's really hard. You know, like you can establish relationships with as many people as you want, but it's a lot of work. So just be mindful of that. So if you're willing to invest yourself into this work and work with another person, be mindful that if they're sharing things with you, that you can't just say like, okay, I'm done now, I'm walking away. Like you have to be invested. So be careful with that. Okay, I will definitely answer that question. I'm just gonna go back to the other questions.
What about Alice Wilson's question?
Alice Wilson. Okay.
What are some ways that we can incorporate empathy into our research consultations?
Okay.
For me, like I do a lot of research consultations on Indigenous issues, and like that presentation where Kat and I met, I was talking on how you can do research in Indigenous contexts. And I had quite a few students come to me then about like mental health issues in Native communities. And usually when I have those experiences, it's really important body language, I think. Even over Zoom, making sure that you're directing your energy at them, saying like, I'm here, I'm present. Asking questions about it. If someone comes to you and they're like, I have to write a paper for English and it has to be 2 pages, I don't have a topic. Ask, what are they interested in? I think the point would be to just try to get to know them as a person. Like, what are their hobbies, interests? What do they like, dislike? Who are they? What do they value? It's difficult to try to get that in like a research consultation because this might be the only 20 minutes you ever see them. But I think attempting to just be present has more impact than anything else.
Yeah, and someone had put in the chat, since the pandemic, I've started out the consultation by saying, how are you? And students have responded positively to that and open up. I currently don't do, part of my position doesn't include research consultations, but in my previous career as a career counselor and coach, a career coach, this happened all the time because I did a lot of intake. So when it was the same thing as research consultation, students will come in and ask like, what do I do with my life? What major do I, pursue? Things like that. And part of that work is as Dana said, like sitting and listening to that student. And sometimes you're not going to get through all the work that you set out to do. So your research consultation, okay, so you want to do all this research, you want to get 20 articles, write this paper. Sometimes the anxiety and the stress is just so much that they can't really even think about looking at databases. Like sometimes you just need to acknowledge like, hey, why don't we just sit here for a moment? Or, you know, and I'll send you some information and then we can come back to this, you know. So sometimes taking that break is important. Kay Wooden, I don't know your first name. You wrote that I think it can help to start with answering honestly when someone asks how you are. I think it's instinctive to always say, I'm fine, how are you? But if you open up and just say, well, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed today. I think Dana does very well with this.
I am so bad at that in like emails.
Are you sure?
No. I come up with interesting email bylines. Like I still remember this one, and my colleague Kristen, she still to this day jokes about it. I said, eternally screeching, comma, Dana. Like, I will answer honestly if you ask me, how are you? I'll be like, I'm garbage. This is great. I think that's important. It's important to normalize actually giving a real answer. And it really helps build rapport between people. But then another way too, what I found was like really helpful between me and Kat was the memes. Like that was a way where I had absolutely no emotional energy left after a long day. And so what I really wanted was sometimes I'll just like send a meme to show like, I acknowledge you exist in the world and I have nothing actually to say to you, but here's this beautiful picture I found of like a cat. Like that still goes a long way. It's kind of like nudging someone. And then because of COVID, since we can't like physically nudge each other all the time, it's just another way to ask, how are you?
Yeah, I'm just going to read a couple things from the chat. Renee says, with students, listening is key. So often they tell me long stories of what's happening, usually a problem in either their private lives or with the project, and I just listen and nod till eventually get around to what the actual reference question is. At the end, I just say something encouraging or acknowledging that research is hard and messy, but stick with it, etc. Thank you, Renee, for sharing. And then Erin, sometimes it can be useful to ask someone how you can be there for them. Do they want someone to listen or to help solve a problem? That's an important distinction. That way you can help support them however they feel most comfortable. Thank you, Erin. And then Kay also said that's a great point. I have a friend who always asks me directly when I'm confiding in her if she can help me best by offering advice or validation or just holding space for me to say what I need to say. That's important. Thank you so much for sharing, Erin and Kay. We also got another question, and it's empathy on the administrative level. Okay, our library experienced death back-to-back for months, and as much as we tried to be there for each other, we're all burnt out and still worked in person. I understand. It seemed our administration didn't care about how much we were going through, and if we increase empathy, there needs to be more on the administrative side to help with battling low workplace morale. Any tips on how we can start these conversations without any repercussions? Whew, that is the question of the day. So thank you for that question. That is a really good question. How we can help administratively. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, Dana, do you have any thoughts on that question?
I do. I have many thoughts on that question.
I know you do.
I don't know if I should say
do.
an answer to that question. We can't control how other people act or react, and we can't control how our administrators do or think or strategize. We can control how we act and react, though. And what I like doing in my own context is like putting action behind my words. Like if I say that this is important to me and I value empathy, then I will practice it. I will make sure that the people who interact with me know that that is my valuable aspect, something that's important to me. I think it might not have a super corporate culture change impact, but it is something within our control and something that anyone can do, regardless of how much mental energy we might have for a given day.
Yeah, I mean, that is very difficult. And I don't know. I don't want to do the whole toxic positivity thing, but it's really hard. And so you just kind of huddle up with the people that are remaining and try to build a strong team with those that are there for you and who you're there for. So, I mean, that's not a perfect answer. And, you know, it helps a little bit, but as you said, it does burn you out. And I've experienced that in the past, in past workplaces. So I totally understand. And not to be corny, I empathize with you, but I don't have a perfect answer. Another question, let me see, was, can this be considered in hiring and the interview process? How can we hire empathetic employees? That's a good question. I don't know if Dana has any thoughts on that. But I used to do a lot of hiring of interns, like a lot of hiring of interns in my previous profession. And one of the biggest things that we did was not only just the interview and the group interview, but we also did case studies. So we didn't tell them that there was a right or wrong answer. We would say, okay, this happened, so what do you do? And you can see how someone is and what their approach is like just by what they say. And that is really important. Like, do they even consider what the other person is feeling in the interaction? So that's, you know, not everybody thinks of feelings right away. And I'm speaking from personal experience. This is something that I've worked on for many years. So if I can learn it, you can learn it too. But, you know, trying to think and say, okay, it's not just me. I need to think about not just what I'm saying, but what the other person may be saying or saying with their body language. So in terms of interviewing and the hiring process, maybe incorporate a case study, or just as I've seen in many webinars and trainings on DEI initiatives, put diversity, inclusion, and equity, accessibility, empathy at the top of your job description. Make it known that that's who you want to hire. And it's not just a statement, but it's something that you're willing to live and do every day, and make that change in your workplace. So that's my advice for those who are on hiring committees or doing the hiring for your organization. Let's see, what other questions? Okay, Amy shared this important resource, trauma-informed pedagogy. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, trauma-informed librarianship, that's really important. Let's see. Okay, Yvonne says maybe asking prospective coworkers what they could share about themselves that would help others to understand them. Okay. Angela says, in hiring interviews, we always try to ask a question that allows someone to talk about who they are in some ways and also shows them that we value their flavor that they might bring to our environment. So we ask questions like, what would your spirit animal be? Or if you have a superpower, what would it be? Okay, I like those questions. Oh, thank you, Lori. Okay, Rebecca says, interns have been particularly messy during during the pandemic, I don't feel like it's okay to lie about their ability to meet goals, engage, as that is still the objective. But I did find that in those difficult conversations, it worked really well to ask the interns to evaluate themselves. Exactly. Rebecca, you hit the nail on the head. I've done that in the past when I used to work with my interns. So we would do not a midwinter, but a mid-year evaluation and a final year evaluation. And so there were times, I'll be honest, there were times when I had interns who, not even during COVID, this was several years ago, who really struggled with mental health, family issues, saying that they weren't doing the right thing in college, that they weren't doing enough, going through really traumatic life experiences, commuting all the way from Queens or Brooklyn to Stony Brook every day for classes, dealing with immigration status. All of these things are happening in our lives and in our students' lives and in our interns' lives and our coworkers' lives. So, that's really important to keep in mind. And so, of course, an evaluation is an evaluation, but if you're starting to see someone kind of not deteriorate, but their work performance is kind of slipping, you want to pull them aside and say, hey, let's have a chat. Are you okay? What's going on? Like, you seem a little out of it, and I tell you, like, that has opened up a lot of doors with students, with conversations with students in the past. And that has worked well for me. Every person is different, but the interns that I've worked with, they share. If you give them a private space and it's just you and them, they will share. And then that way on the evaluation, you ask them to evaluate, and then you'll say, I don't know about this. Explain to me why you think that score was what you think you should receive. Sometimes they score themselves lower, and sometimes they score themselves higher than what they have achieved. And that conversation is really important. So thank you for bringing that up, Rebecca.
Dana and Kat, we have now we only have a couple of minutes left. So if you want to wrap it up, or if anyone has one last question, you want to read something, that would be great. And we're just about done. Thank you so much.
This has been fun. It's been nice.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing in the comments. And if I didn't get to read out what you wrote, it should be saved in the Zoom chat, right, in the recording, right, Jennifer? Maybe.
Chat, I'm not positive. That's a good question.
I know sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. So I just that's why I wanted to read everything out loud. But thank you everyone for sharing, and just, try your best. That's all you can do. No perfect answer.
Yes, that skeletal affirmation, progress, not perfection.
Attendees can save the chat as a file too.
Okay, great.
We're getting lots of thank yous. Good discussion this morning.
Yeah, I'm just reading Sarah's message now. Thank you for sharing that. Exactly. I've actually went out of my way to hire people that didn't necessarily fit the job description because of things that I heard and what they were saying in their interview. And they actually ended up being the best hires I've ever had. So really be mindful of who you're hiring, and especially during the interview process. Sometimes whoever is amazing on paper may not be the right person for your organization. That's why the conversations are so important. So thank you, Sarah, and then Rebecca followed up on that.
All right, it's 10 o'clock. think a lot of people are signing out, but thank you so much for your presentation. This was really helpful. Really good discussion this morning.
You're welcome. No problem.
Thanks, Jennifer.